The knocking started where no knocking should have been possible. 800 meters inside a Norwegian mountain with 40,000 tons of ancient rock pressing down from every side, the tunnel wall answered back. Not an echo, not equipment vibration, not loose stone ticking under stress. 3 slow knocks from inside the granite. Then 2 more lower down, as if something had shifted and put its ear against the other side. Erik Halvorsen had spent 14 years drilling through mountains, and he knew the language of rock better than he knew most people. He knew the dry snap of a stress fracture. He knew the long metallic groan of bored steel cooling in damp air. He knew the soft hiss of water forcing itself through hairline cracks older than human history. But that sound, deliberate, spaced patient, was wrong in a way that made his body react before his mind did. Every muscle locked. The skin on the back of his neck tightened. Even the machine seemed to go quiet around it. The crew froze with him. In the white glare of work lamps, the tunnel face looked raw and wet, a fresh wound in the mountain. Drill dust floated in the air like smoke. Diesel fumes hung low. Somewhere behind them, groundwater tapped steadily into a sump pit. Then the mountain knocked again. Once, a pause. Then a dragging scrape from inside the wall like fingernails testing stone. Welcome back to the channel. Before this story gets any darker, tell me where you're watching from tonight. And if true horror, deep earth mysteries, and stories that leave you staring at your walls after midnight are your thing, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Because what they heard in that tunnel wasn't the last sound the mountain made. It was the first time it realized they could hear it too. Erik Halvorsen was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet, and built in the practical way men are built when their lives depend on routine. He lived outside Bergen in a small gray house with a view of a narrow lake that stayed steel-colored most of the year. He had once been married briefly, but the marriage had dissolved under the weight of long shifts, missed holidays, and a kind of emotional silence that had seemed harmless until it calcified into distance. Since then, he had settled into a life governed by patterns: black coffee before dawn, weather check drive to the site, helmet on, lamp tested, radio clipped, shift report reviewed, rock face examined. He liked tunnels because they obeyed rules. Mountains were dangerous, but they were honest. A mountain did not hide its nature. Pressure built. Water found seams. Fault zones weakened. Gas pockets threatened. If a crew stayed disciplined, read the rock correctly, and respected the mountain, the work got done. Risk could be measured. Fear could be managed. That belief was one of the reasons he had agreed to the E16 bypass extension north of Voss, a government-backed tunnel project cutting a new 2-lane route through a steep mountain region notorious for landslides, avalanches, and winter closures. The pay was good. The geology was difficult, but not unusually so. Hard gneiss, some bands of mica schist, intermittent water ingress, standard reinforcement plans. The mountain had a reputation among locals, but in Norway, every mountain had a reputation. Old places collected old stories. The project camp sat on a shelf of blasted ground above a fjord branch, surrounded by pines bent permanently by wind. Portable offices, generator sheds, equipment tents, fuel tanks, and stacks of rock bolts lined the muddy lot. During daylight, it looked mundane, functional, temporary. But on graveyard shift, with fog drifting low from the trees and the tunnel mouth breathing cold air into the dark, the place took on a hush that made even jokes sound disrespectful. The crew on Erik's rotation was small and competent. There was Mikko, the lead driller, who hid nerves behind constant sarcasm. Rune, the explosives man, careful to the point of superstition. Farah, a geologist from Oslo on a 6-month field assignment, younger than the others but sharp enough that even older workers listened when she spoke. And then there was Jostein, the oldest man on the night team, a mechanic with tobacco-stained fingers and the habit of looking over his shoulder before entering the tunnel as if checking whether something intended to follow him. Jostein was from a nearby village. He knew every farm road, every lake, every church ruin in the district. He also knew the stories. He did not tell them often, but when he did, his voice lost its rough humor and flattened into something more careful. The mountain they were cutting into was called Skarveli by the survey maps. But older people in the valley used another name, Stilleberget, the Quiet Mountain. Erik first heard the name during the second week of the project, when fog had sealed the whole valley, and everyone had ended up drinking bad vending machine coffee in the brake cabin at 3 in the morning. Jostein had been staring into the steam from his paper cup when he said, "My grandfather wouldn't walk near this slope after dark." Mikkel laughed. "Because of trolls," Jostein shrugged. "Because of the knocking." That got Farah's attention. "Knocking from where?" "The stone." Jostein took a slow sip. "People used to hear it in winter mostly, deep in the ground, near the old sheep tracks higher up the ridge. Not all the time. Just enough to make people stop talking." Mikkel grinned. "Probably frost cracks. My grandfather buried 2 lambs with broken necks after hearing it one night. Said they were found against a rock face like they'd run from something they couldn't see." Now that Mikkel said is the kind of story you wait until after shift to tell. Jostein didn't smile. "I'm telling it after shift." That earned a few uneasy laughs, and then the conversation drifted. But the story stayed with Erik, not because he believed it, but because of how Jostein had told it. No performance, no wink, just memory. There were other small things too. Nothing dramatic. Nothing any practical person would call evidence. Once Erik noticed that sound behaved strangely past the 600-meter mark, as if the tunnel swallowed certain frequencies and sent others back warped. A shouted instruction might return from behind them instead of ahead. Metal impacts sometimes seemed muffled, while a dropped wrench would ring too long. Farah blamed geometry and moisture. Erik accepted that. Then there were the birds. On 2 separate mornings, dead birds were found just inside the tunnel mouth. No visible trauma, no blood. Just small black bodies lying on the gravel as if they had fallen straight out of flight. Rune said pressure changes or fumes might have confused them. That made sense. Mostly. And there was water too. Not unusual seepage, this was different. At around 730 meters, a narrow vertical thread of moisture had begun leaking through an untouched stretch of wall. The water came out dark at first in the lamplight, almost oily, before settling clear in the drain channel. It carried a faint smell Erik couldn't identify. Not sulfur, not rot. Something mineral and stale like air trapped too long underground. When he mentioned it, Farah crouched to inspect the streak and frowned. "Could be a sealed pocket opening," she said. "Ancient groundwater, maybe trapped in a discontinuity plane. Safe." She hesitated. "Probably." Probably was not a word Erik liked underground. Still, the job moved forward. Drill, blast, vent, muck, scale, reinforce. Meter by meter. The mountain gave ground the way all mountains did, slowly, grudgingly, and only under force. By the 4th week, they had passed 780 meters. By the 5th, the temperature inside the tunnel began to drop, for no clear reason. The ventilation system was functioning, equipment was normal. Yet past a certain point, the air turned unnaturally cold, not in the refreshing way underground air sometimes does, but in a still cellar-deep way that seemed to sink through clothing and settle into joints. Men coming out of the face rubbed their arms and blamed drafts. Erik said nothing, though he had begun to notice another detail. The cold was strongest near the right-hand wall, exactly where the seepage line ran down the stone. Then, on a Tuesday night just before midnight, the drill head shut down at 800 meters. Not because of failure, because Mikkel had lifted his hand, eyes fixed on the wall, and whispered into the sudden silence, "Did that just knock back?" At first, nobody moved. The quiet inside a working tunnel was so unnatural that it felt staged, like a machine world had been switched off and something older had stepped in to use the silence. The jumbo drill idled low behind them. Ventilation hissed through ducting overhead. Water ticked into runoff channels. White work lights threw hard shadows across the tunnel face, making every crack look deeper than it was. Erik stood near the fresh drilling marks, gloved hand still resting on a hose line, and listened. Nothing. Mikkel exhaled sharply through his nose and muttered, "Forget it." Then the wall answered. "Talk, talk, talk." 3 knocks evenly spaced from inside the right side of the face, far enough beneath the surface that the sound came dull and thick, but distinct enough that everyone heard it clearly. Rune turned all the way around as if expecting a prank. Who did that? Farah's eyes never left the wall. Nobody. Jostein had gone pale beneath his beard. Erik stepped closer, shut everything fully down. Mikkel killed the drill. Rune silenced the compressor feed. One by one, the machine noises bled away until only the ventilation line remained whispering along the ceiling like wind through a throat. The crew formed a loose line several meters from the face. Then came a 5th sound, not a knock this time, but a scrape. Slow, vertical, something dragging across the other side of the stone. Farah recovered first. Could be rock movement in a void. Eric nodded because that was the best possibility, and because everybody needed a best possibility. Maybe. We treat it like a cavity until proven otherwise. He approached the wall with a scaling bar and struck the rock surface lightly in several places, listening to the return tone. Hard. Dense. Then, just right of center at chest height, the impact answered with a subtly hollower note. Not empty exactly, but different. Mikkel heard it too. There. Farah moved up beside Eric. That section wasn't mapping unusual on the last log. Fault seam. Not visible. The seepage line was nearby, running dark and narrow toward the floor drain. Under Eric's lamp, the stone around it glistened. He crouched and touched the wet patch with one gloved finger. Cold. Much colder than the ambient air. The strange mineral smell was stronger now. Jostein spoke from behind them, quiet enough that it almost vanished in the tunnel. You shouldn't open it tonight. Nobody replied. Eric stood. We're not blasting blind. We core sample first. Mikkel looked relieved. Rune less so. Farah already had her notebook out. They set up for a short exploratory bore on the anomalous section. It should have been routine. In tunnel work, hidden voids were serious but manageable. Better to discover them with a core barrel than with a full charge. Mikkel positioned the rig carefully. Eric stood 2 meters back, eyes on alignment. Farah watched the angle. Rune kept glancing down the tunnel toward the mouth, though they were far too deep to see daylight. When the bit touched the stone, the entire crew tensed. Go, Eric said. The drill engaged with a shriek, boring into hard rock. Powder spit back in a controlled stream. The sound filled the tunnel, mechanical, normal, steady. For several seconds, Eric felt his pulse begin to settle. Then the drill suddenly lurched forward 3 extra centimeters as resistance vanished. Void, Farah said. Mikkel disengaged immediately. A fine draft of air exhaled from the borehole. It hit Eric's face through the gap beneath his visor air that was cold, stale, and old enough to feel wrong. Not simply underground air, this carried a trapped dryness, a faint metallic tang, and beneath that a smell like wet fur sealed in a cellar for decades. Rune swore under his breath. Farah leaned close to the hole with a penlight. I can't see much. Maybe a pocket. Depth, Eric asked. Mikkel checked. About 80 centimeters in before breakthrough. That was unusual, but not catastrophic. Small voids happened. Cavities opened along fracture zones, sometimes nothing more than irregular pockets. Eric was already about to call for a camera insertion when something tapped the inside of the borehole from the other end. Just once, every person there heard it. Mikkel jerked back so fast he almost lost his footing. Farah stumbled into the wall. Rune said no in a voice that sounded less like denial and more like prayer. A thin thread of dark moisture began to run from the hole. Not clear groundwater, black. It spilled slowly, at first viscous enough to cling to the stone before dripping down over the fresh drill dust. Under the work lamps, it reflected no color at all, only a wet, light-swallowing sheen. Farah stared. That's not possible. Eric moved forward carefully. Nobody touch it. The liquid reached the floor channel and mixed with runoff. The smell intensified instantly. Not oil, not fuel, not sewage. Something organic but ancient and flattened by mineral cold into something almost unrecognizable. Talk! The borehole answered with a second knock. This time there was no ambiguity. Something had struck the other side. Mikkel backed away until he hit the drill frame. Seal it right now. With what Farah snapped, still staring. We don't even know what. The wall bulged. It was subtle, so slight that Eric later doubted his own memory of it. Yet all of them saw it, the damp rock around the core hole, lifted outward a fraction of an inch, as if pressure from behind had tested the skin of the mountain and let it relax again. Rune turned and retched into the drain. Eric did what years underground had trained him to do. He took control of the procedure because procedure was the only defense against panic. Back up 20 meters, he said. Now, Mikkel marked the section. Farah call surface control. Rune no explosives, no further drilling. But Jostein was already gone. Eric spun. The mechanic stood farther down the tunnel than the others, retreating backward one step at a time, eyes locked on the wall. It's awake, he said. No, Eric said sharply. It's a cavity, move. Jostein shook his head. My grandfather said if it answers, you leave before it learns your rhythm. The sentence landed in the tunnel with horrible weight. Farah spoke into the radio, her voice clipped and fast. Signal underground was imperfect, but enough to get a response from the site office. Eric only caught fragments: possible void, abnormal seepage, suspend face work, need inspection team. The radio crackled with static so harsh it made everyone flinch. And through that static, for less than a second, another sound came over the channel. Breathing. Slow, wet, close to the microphone. Farah yanked the radio from her ear and stared at it. "Did you hear that?" Nobody answered because the tunnel lights dimmed all at once. Not fully out, just lowered, flickering once, twice, then steadied to a weaker glow. The ventilation hiss cut off. Silence flooded in so suddenly it felt like pressure. The darkness beyond the lighted face deepened. Without the ventilation, the tunnel stopped feeling like a workplace and became what it truly was: a man-made wound bored into the core of an indifferent mountain. Then something moved behind the wall. Not a scrape this time, a shifting internal migration, as if a body too large for the cavity had rolled its weight slowly against the stone. The core hole widened with a dry cracking sound. A thin shape pushed through. At first, Eric thought it was a root, pale and crooked. Then it bent at the wrong angle and spread into narrow jointed segments, too many of them ending in a black tip that clicked against the rock. It withdrew halfway, probed again, and tapped the outer wall as delicately as a blind finger. Mikkel made a sound Eric had never heard from a grown man before, something small and childlike and stripped of dignity. Farah whispered, "That's bone." Eric did not know if she was right, but the thing that had emerged from the borehole was not plant, not cable, not mineral formation. It flexed with intent. He grabbed the emergency foam pack from the wall kit, sprinted forward, and rammed the nozzle over the drilled opening. "Eric," Farah shouted. He triggered the sealant. Expanding industrial foam blasted into the hole surrounding the pale, probing limb. For an instant, the thing whipped violently jointed sections, rattling against the stone with a dry insectile clatter. Then the foam engulfed it, hardening outward in a yellow mass that sealed the breach and pinned whatever had begun to emerge. The tunnel went dead still. Eric backed away, heart pounding so hard it blurred his vision. The others stared at the growing plug of hardened sealant. Nothing moved. Then from deep inside the rock beyond that sealed opening came a sound that no one in the tunnel would ever later describe the same way. Farah said it was a moan. Mikkel called it machinery. Rune insisted it was a chorus of voices underwater. Eric remembered it as the sound a person might make if they had forgotten how to use a human throat, but were trying anyway. The light snapped fully off. Complete darkness swallowed the crew. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, there was nothing but black breath and the cold smell pouring from the wall. Then helmet lamps came on in panicked bursts, stabbing white beams in every direction. The sealant plug was gone. Not broken. Gone. Only the drilled hole remained clean and dark, with black liquid running from it in a thin, steady line. And written in that liquid across the wall in strokes too long and precise to have dripped naturally was a shape Eric first took for a crack. Then his mind assembled it. A vertical mark. A second beside it. Then 5 short horizontal dashes crossing them in groups. Counting. Farah looked at the marks, then at the 5 of them standing in the tunnel and whispered, "It knows how many we are." That was the moment ordinary fear ended. From there on, every choice they made belonged to something worse. Surface control told them to evacuate the face and wait for morning assessment. That should have been simple. Pack out, tag the work zone, get back to the portal, file a hazard report. No one wanted to argue with that plan. But the tunnel had changed in a way none of them could explain, and by the time they began the walk out, each person already sensed that leaving would not be as straightforward as turning around. Eric led. Farah stayed close behind with the geologging tablet tucked under one arm like a shield. Mikkel and Rune hauled essential gear. Jostein trailed at the rear, muttering something too low to hear. Their lamps cut tunnels of light through suspended dust, illuminating the wet walls in brief slices, while darkness pooled thick and absolute beyond the beams. At first, everything appeared normal. Drain channel on the left. Utility lines overhead. Distance markers spray-painted at intervals along the wall. Rough shotcrete patches where earlier reinforcement had gone in. Yet after maybe 5 minutes of walking, Eric's steps slowed. "We should have passed 760 by now," he said. Mikkel shined his lamp at the nearest marker. "That says 792. Nobody spoke for a second. Eric turned to look behind them. The face lights were gone, swallowed by the bend in distance. Fine. That made sense. But the tunnel felt too long in both directions. He walked to the next marker. 2 meters. That was impossible. Farah came up beside him. Maybe we looped around the service bay. There is no loop. Rune's voice shook. Somebody repainted those. In 5 minutes, Eric snapped, then regretted the tone instantly. Farah crouched at the wall, running gloved fingers over the paint. Fresh enough to smear. But when she held up her hand, the red number stain on her glove was not paint. It was the same black fluid that had seeped from the borehole, only now it clung in a thin skin over her fingertips. She wiped it on her coverall so fast it looked like a burn. This wasn't here before. Jostein said, "Don't read the numbers." No one asked why. They just kept walking. The cold deepened gradually. Conversation died. Their breath began to fog. The tunnel walls sweated more heavily, though the water now ran downward in branching black threads rather than clear trickles. Eric told himself it was contaminated runoff, some interaction with drill dust and minerals. He did not believe that, but the act of explanation mattered. At marker 786, they found the first helmet. It lay in the drain channel lamp, still on, half submerged in black water. Not one of theirs. This was an older model, scratched and yellowed, the kind some crews had used 10 or 15 years earlier. A sticker on the side had faded almost blank, but part of a name remained visible. Mikkel stared. From another site. No, Jostein said. His voice had changed. It had gone flat the way old wood feels dry. My uncle worked on a test bore up this mountain in 1987. Nobody moved. He said one man disappeared inside after a collapse alarm. They searched 2 days. Found his lunchbox. Found his hammer. Never found him. Rune swallowed. What was his name? Jostein looked at the broken sticker. Einar. A wet tap sounded somewhere ahead, then another farther away, then several more at once, scattered through the dark like a code being relayed from deeper underground. Eric forced movement. Keep going. They did. Faster now. The tunnel no longer felt empty. That was the worst part, not seeing anything outright, but knowing with an animal certainty that the dark beyond the lamps contained structure, attention, and patience. Every few minutes, Eric caught glimpses at the edges of his vision. A pale angle, withdrawing behind a cable rack. A shadow crossing where no crosscut existed. A vertical shape standing between 2 bolts and then turning flat against the wall so completely that it became rock again. He refused to acknowledge any of it aloud. Then Farah stopped. What is that? Her lamp pointed to a patch of wall on the right side where the rock had become unnaturally smooth. Not worked smooth, worn smooth, as though countless bodies had brushed the same path over and over across centuries. Embedded in that polished section were things that reflected their lights with a soft, pearly sheen. Mikkel approached before Eric could stop him. They were fingernails, not loose on the ground, not caught accidentally. They were pressed into the stone itself, dozens of them curved and yellow-white, some split, some blood-dark at the base, all trapped just beneath the mineral surface like insects preserved in amber. Rune backed away, hand over his mouth. Farah whispered, "No, no, no, no." Eric swept his lamp farther along the polished strip. The wall carried more than nails. There were faint parallel grooves at shoulder height. Lower down, short crescent scrapes. Higher, long drags where something taller or stretched had reached upward. It's a squeeze point, Mikkel said, but he was saying it to himself. People tried to force through. There is no opening, Farah said. Jostein's eyes were wet with reflected light. Not from our side. The tapping ahead stopped. In the silence, something behind them knocked once from within the wall. Eric turned so violently his boots slipped on wet stone. The sound had come from the left wall now, well behind them, a meter or 2 above the floor. Another knock followed, moving closer. Not in open air. Inside the mountain itself. A progression. A thing traveling through stone by feel. Run, Rune said. No one called the word cliché in that tunnel. They all obeyed it. The crew broke into a stumbling sprint, lights jerking wildly. Boots splashed through shallow channels. Equipment banged against hips and knees. The tunnel rushed past in fractured glimpses, bolt shadows, cable hangers, raw blast texture, black streaks moving down walls like veins opening under skin. The knocks pursued them, not fast, not frantic, measured, always behind, always gaining a little. Eric reached a widening in the tunnel that should have opened into a maintenance recess near 700 meters. Instead, it opened into a chamber none of them had seen before. He stopped so abruptly Mikkel nearly collided with him. The chamber was roughly circular, maybe 12 meters across, with a ceiling arched naturally above tool marks that faded into older stone. It was not part of the project plans. No survey had shown it. Their lamps slid over the space and found objects arranged with an almost ceremonial precision along the walls. Old boots, rust-eaten lanterns, helmets from different decades, a child's red mitten stiff with mineral deposits, lengths of cable, a broken thermos, a jawbone. Rune made a strangled noise. "We're not supposed to be here." Farah turned slowly, cataloging details because it was the only way to keep from collapsing. "These items are from different periods, different occupations, different..." Her light stopped on the far wall. There, set into the stone in a shallow human-shaped depression, was a body. Not fresh, not skeletal either. It looked mummified by cold and minerals. The clothing fused to the rock skin, shrunken and gray against bone. The face had collapsed inward, lips drawn tight over teeth, but one eye socket still held a dark, glossy remnant, like dried resin. The hands were raised at shoulder height, palms out, as if the person had tried to push backward through the wall and been caught halfway. Around the wrists, the stone bulged in smooth ridges, integrated, grown over. Mikkel whispered, "Jesus Christ." Farah stepped closer despite herself. A worker ID card hung from the mineralized chest plastic, clouded but legible enough under her lamp. Einar Solheim, 1987. Jostein let out one sound, a broken inward breath, and sat down hard on the tunnel floor. The knocks resumed, this time from inside the chamber walls. One to the left, two on the right, one high above. The sounds boxed them in, turning the chamber into a resonant body. Eric forced himself toward function. "We barricade. Temporary. We rest, get bearings, call surface again." "There is no signal," Farah said, holding up the radio. Static hissed. Beneath it, faintly something counted in a voice that wasn't human enough to parse each syllable, caught in wet distortion. She switched it off. They dragged equipment crates and a hose reel toward the entrance of the chamber, constructing a pathetic obstruction that did more for morale than defense. Rune found an emergency flare in a side pouch and gripped it like a knife. Mikkel paced, muttering numbers to himself. Jostein sat staring at his uncle in the wall as if trying to remember him alive. Eric crouched beside Farah. "You saw the wall at the face. What do you think?" She took too long to answer. "I think we opened into a natural cavity connected to void spaces inside the mountain. I think there may be gases, mineral contamination, maybe neurotoxic exposure causing disorientation. And the thing in the drill hole," her expression tightened. "I think if I say hallucination out loud, neither of us will believe me. Number." She looked at the chamber walls. Some geology folklore refers to resonant mountains, acoustic anomalies, subglacial voids, ancient trapped biomes. "Biomes don't count us on the wall." Farah pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes. "Then I don't know." Something slid across the far side of the chamber's ceiling. All lamps snapped upward. For an instant, the lights caught a pale, articulated shape flattened against the rock overhead. It was much larger than the probing limb they had seen at the borehole, long as a man made of too many jointed segments wrapped in skin so thin it looked translucent over a dark internal structure. It moved by compressing and extending itself in quiet ripples. Where a face should have been, there was only a smooth front plane split by vertical slits that opened and closed around rows of tiny, inward-pointing teeth. Then it crossed beyond the lamps and vanished into a crack too narrow to accept its body. Rune ignited the flare. Red light burst across the chamber, violent and smoking. The walls came alive with detail that white lamps had hidden. Thousands of scratches, finger marks, smears, the smooth, polished tracks along the stone. And written everywhere in layers, some carved, some drawn in black residue, some gouged with tools, were fragments of messages in Norwegian, Sami English, and incoherent symbols. "Don't answer it. It uses the sound. We thought it was people. Close your mouth when it calls. Be quiet, and it can't map you." Farah read aloud, voice shaking. "It learns the shape of whoever speaks." Mikkel turned on Eric. "We should have left at the first knock." Eric did not defend himself because Mikkel was right. Jostein finally stood and approached his uncle's body. He told them something, he said. "What?" Farah asked. Jostein pointed weakly at the mineralized chest. Tucked under the fused jacket flap was a notebook half embedded in calcified deposits. Eric and Farah worked it free, carefully peeling pages apart where they had stuck over time. Most of the writing had rotted unreadable, but several pages remained legible in cramped Norwegian. Farah translated aloud, stumbling through damaged lines. He says they found a seam in the rock, hollow behind it. Heard tapping. One worker tapped back as a joke. Her voice dropped. After that, they started hearing their own voices farther inside where no one was standing. She turned another page. We found Carrie at shift change, facing the wall and speaking softly to it. She said someone on the other side sounded lost and cold. She said it knew her mother's voice. Rune closed his eyes. Farah kept reading. It doesn't come through all at once. It studies first. It copies. It asks to be let nearer. The last intact page was stained almost black. Only one sentence survived in full. When it knocks in your rhythm, you are already open. Nobody in the chamber spoke after that. Time stretched. Sometimes the knocks circled outside the entrance. Sometimes they came from beneath the floor. Once from the wall behind Mikkel's head, there came the soft, unmistakable sound of his own voice asking Eric, "Can you give me a hand with this?" Mikkel did not turn. He just began to cry silently and kept his eyes on the flare. The flare burned low. Their lamps dimmed as batteries drained in the cold. Eric knew waiting would kill them. Whether the threat was physical, psychological, or something beyond, both staying in that chamber meant yielding initiative to it. "We move," he said, to where Rune whispered. "To the portal, or any mapped cross passage. Fast. No talking unless necessary. Don't respond to voices unless you see the person speaking. Stay in contact." Jostein looked at his uncle one last time. It kept him. Eric grabbed his shoulder gently. "Then we don't let it keep anyone else." They left the chamber in a tight line, one hand on the person ahead like divers entering black water. For a while, the tunnel behaved again. Markers decreased. 690, 672, 650. Hope flickered weakly. Eric began to believe the chamber might have been some kind of unplanned breakthrough cavity, their disorientation temporary, their perceptions compromised by stress and atmosphere. Then Farah, walking just behind him, squeezed his sleeve hard enough to stop him.
"What?"
She aimed her lamp down. The floor ahead was covered in footprints, dozens of them, fresh and black wet residue, all headed toward the crew. Not boot prints alone, some were narrow and bare with too many long toes. Others looked almost human until one noticed the backward heel. A few were so elongated they suggested things that moved upright only some of the time, and layered over all of them were 5 distinct boot prints matching their own crew. Leading ahead, their future steps already pressed into the wet stone, vanishing into darkness they had not reached yet. Rune broke then. He turned and bolted blindly into the dark behind them. "Rune!" Eric shouted. The electrician's lamp bounced away in panic, shrinking fast. Then the tunnel around them answered in Rune's voice from 3 directions at once. "Help me!" A beat, then closer and softer right beside Farah's ear, though no one stood there. "Don't let it wear me!" Farah screamed. Eric lunged after Rune. He caught only glimpses in the frantic chase. Splashes, light flashes, wall blur, the cold cutting deeper with every step. Then he rounded a slight bend and found Rune standing perfectly still in the center of the tunnel, back to him flare, hanging limp at his side. "Rune," Eric said carefully. "Come here." Rune did not move. At the edge of Eric's lamp beam, the tunnel wall ahead of Rune had opened into a seam barely 30 centimeters wide. From that seam protruded several pale segmented limbs laid lightly around Rune's shoulders and arms with almost affectionate precision. The electrician spoke in a calm voice that was not calm at all. "It says there are people inside. It says they've been alone a long time." Rune, step away. "It says the mountain remembers every voice." One of the pale limbs slid up along Rune's neck. Eric saw then that the black tips were not claws, but delicate hooked structures thin enough to slip beneath skin. Mikkel appeared at Eric's side and whispered, "What do we do?" Before Eric could answer, Rune turned. His face was wrong. Not transformed, not grotesque, worse. The features were still his, but the expression had been emptied out and arranged by imitation. The smile sat too wide. The eyes focused a fraction late. Then his mouth opened and a knock came from inside his throat. "Talk! Talk! Talk!" Mikkel swung the scaling bar with both hands. The steel struck Rune's temple with a crack that sent him collapsing sideways. The pale limbs withdrew instantly into the seam impossibly fast, carrying strands of black fluid with them. For 2 full seconds, no one breathed. Then Rune groaned. Human, bleeding, dazed, alive. Eric and Mikkel dragged him away while Farah covered the seam with the beam of her lamp. Something moved behind the crack but did not emerge. It seemed to dislike direct light, or perhaps sudden violence, or perhaps it had simply learned patience. They half-carried Rune onward. By then, there was no possibility of doubt left. The thing or things inside the mountain could mimic voices, anticipate movement, and reach through any weak place in the stone. It herded them not with speed, but with knowledge. Every time they chose a direction, the tunnel rearranged itself psychologically, if not physically, narrowing options, deepening fear, making wrongness feel inevitable. At approximately what Eric guessed was 500 meters, they reached a reinforced emergency alcove containing a control box, first aid cabinet, and heavy temporary steel service door leading to a narrow utility drift. It was not a true exit, but it was a contained space. They got the door open and piled inside. The drift beyond was barely tall enough to stand straight in. Electrical conduits ran along one wall. The air was even colder. Eric slammed the steel door shut and dogged the wheel lock. For the first time since the face, they had a barrier thicker than a crate or hose reel between themselves and the tunnel. Rune sat against the wall, breathing hard, blood running from his scalp into his beard. Mikkel crouched opposite him, trembling from exertion and guilt. Farah checked the first aid cabinet. We've got bandages, saline, 1 emergency thermal blanket, and... God.
What?
She held up a hand mirror from the kit. Someone had scratched words into the back. Don't let it hear you sleep. Jostein laughed, then a dry, cracked sound that bordered on hysteria. Eric pressed both palms against the cold steel door and listened. For a long time, nothing touched it. Then very gently from the other side came 5 knocks. Perfectly spaced, in the exact rhythm of Eric's heartbeat. The steel door bowed inward on the 3rd series of knocks. Not much, just a soft flex at the center panel, enough to make the locking wheel tremble under Eric's hand. But it should not have moved at all. The service door was rated for pressure events, debris impact, emergency compartmentalization. Whatever waited outside was not striking it with brute force. It was finding the resonant points and pressing exactly where the metal wanted to yield. Talk, a pause. Talk, talk, then silence. Farah was the first to understand. It's not trying to break in, she said quietly. It's testing the pattern. Eric looked at the scraped warning on the mirror again. Don't let it hear you sleep. Another line from Einar's notebook surfaced in his memory like something cold rising through water. It uses the sound. The knocks resumed shifting rhythm each time. Mikkel's ragged breathing, Rune's stuttering swallow, Jostein's nervous foot tap. Every little involuntary human cadence was being sampled, copied, returned. It maps by response, Farah said. Echolocation maybe, but more than that, mimicry tied to behavior. She looked up, face pale and tight. If it can reproduce a rhythm perfectly, maybe it can open a synchronization response. Neurological, instinctive. That's why Rune froze. Eric did not fully understand the science, but he understood enough. Then no sound. They killed all but 1 lamp. The drift narrowed farther and sloping slightly upward toward a maintenance junction Eric vaguely remembered from old plans. If they could get through the utility drift, they might reconnect to a shallower ventilation access tunnel leading closer to the portal. It was a miserable option, cramped and half-serviced, but it was movement. He lifted Rune. We go now. The drift forced them into single file. Cables brushed their shoulders. Condensation dripped from the ceiling. Their boots sank into fine mud over crushed stone. Behind them, the steel door rang softly once, as if a fingernail had traced a circle on the other side. Then, another sound came through the metal. Eric's own voice, not speaking loudly, not shouting for help, whispering directly behind his ear in the exact tone he used when waking from bad dreams. It's under your skin already. His grip on Rune faltered. Farah, right behind him, hissed, "Keep moving." The drift bent left, then right. The air thickened with the smell of wet metal and the older smell from the cavity-trapped animal, ruinously stale. At one bend, Eric's lamp swept across the wall and caught dozens of dark smears at shoulder height. Handprints, some human-sized, some much larger but narrow with 6 finger-like lengths ending in hooked black points. They were all pointed in the same direction, toward the maintenance junction, as if many things had once moved this way in a rush. They reached the junction 10 minutes later, or an hour. Time had begun to lose its shape. The place was a small, reinforced node where the utility drift met an older pilot, bore one cut decades earlier during abandoned surveys and later sealed from the main works. The concrete lining here was stained dark with age. Rusted brackets jutted from the walls. A ladder rose to a hatch set in the ceiling, probably leading to a ventilation shaft or inspection rise. Eric felt a hard pulse of hope. Then he saw the hatch. It was open, not fully, just enough to leave a vertical black gap. Cold air fell through it in a steady stream. Jostein began to back away immediately. No, it could lead out, Mikkel whispered. It doesn't, Jostein said. That wasn't open before. None of them asked how he knew. A thin line of black liquid ran down the ladder from above bead after bead, collecting on the rungs and dropping to the floor. Farah swept her lamp up through the gap. Something high in the shaft withdrew from the light with a fast, dry ripple. That decided it. Up was death. They turned instead toward the old pilot bore a narrow concrete tube descending slightly before curving out of sight. The original blast had been sealed years ago, but the barrier wall now lay broken inward in chunks, as if something from the far side had patiently dismantled it piece by piece. The pilot bore beyond was too smooth, too intact. No dust, no debris, just a dark corridor vanishing into rock that no modern project map had included. Rune, barely conscious, mumbled, "It wants us to pick." Eric knew that was true. Every route now was a choice inside its design. The question was whether there remained any path not already anticipated. Then Farah did something that changed everything. She walked to the junction control cabinet, pried it open, and scanned the old schematics laminated inside the door. Her eyes moved fast, despite the trembling in her hands. "There's a blast vent manifold," she said. "This junction ties into the older survey bore and the active tunnel ventilation. If we overload the emergency fire suppression and close the pressure dampers," she looked up, "we might be able to create a backdraft pulse through the old bore. Heat steam pressure." "You want to burn it out," Mikkel said. "I want to force everything in connected cavities toward the active face or collapse weak seams." Farah swallowed. "It's not guaranteed. It could also bury us." Eric looked at the ceiling hatch, at the pilot bore, at the steel service drift they had come through. All of them were already part of the thing's territory. "Can you do it?" "Maybe." "Do it!" While Farah worked the cabinet, Eric and Mikkel barricaded the pilot bore entrance with broken concrete chunks and a spare cable spool. Jostein bound Rune's head wound. The old mechanic's hands had steadied now, as if fear had finally concentrated into purpose. From somewhere above in the open hatch came a delicate knocking, almost playful. Farah cursed under her breath. "Manual overrides are partly corroded." "What do you need?" Eric asked. "Time." He almost laughed at that. The first pale limb emerged through the hatch a minute later. It dangled upside down into the junction, feeling the air. Then another followed, and another, each longer than the last, jointed and white translucent black hooks opening and closing at the tips with soft clicking sounds. They descended without hurry, tasting vibrations. Mikkel swung the scaling bar and shattered one against the ladder. The broken segment hit the floor, thrashing silently, spraying black fluid. Its interior was not flesh in any ordinary sense. It contained fine, moving filaments wrapped around a dark, hollow core like wet threads around a flute. A second limb lashed toward him and buried its hooks into his shoulder through the coveralls. Mikkel screamed. That was enough sound. The pilot bore answered. From beyond the barricade came a rushing slither of many bodies compressing through confined space. Eric pulled Mikkel backward while Jostein hacked at the limb with a wrench. It tore free, bringing strips of fabric and blood. The ceiling above them came alive with movement as several of the creatures unfolded farther from the shaft, dropping halfway into view. In full light, they looked like a nightmare assembled from cave biology and human remains, elongated, segmented trunks, semi-transparent skin over internal dark channels, radial limbs that could serve as legs or fingers, depending on angle, and at the front, that smooth faceplate lined with slits. Some carried features under the skin that suggested stolen structure, jaw shapes, finger bones, fragments of vertebrae suspended and repurposed in alien geometry. Not evolved, Eric thought wildly. Built, made from what they had taken. Farah shouted from the control cabinet. On my mark, open the manifold valve. Which one? The red wheel labeled obsolete. That is not reassuring. The barricade exploded inward. 2 creatures flowed through the gap, low to the ground limbs, working in ripples. Another rose behind them, taller, unfolding nearly to ceiling height. As it straightened, the slits in its front plate opened wider, and from inside came a sound so intimate and terrible that Eric's knees nearly buckled. His ex-wife's voice, soft, hurt, exactly as she had sounded the last night she moved out. "Eric, why won't you answer me?" The thing tilted its head. Then it spoke again in a child's voice that had no business existing in his memory at all. The voice of the son they had almost had before the miscarriage, built not from truth but from grief. "I'm still in the dark." Eric froze. It had found not just surface sound now, but shape inside him. Emotional rhythm. The private architecture of regret. Mikkel, bleeding and furious, broke the spell by driving the scaling bar through the nearest creature's front slit. The steel punched in several inches. Black fluid erupted. The creature convulsed so violently it cracked its own limbs against the wall, releasing a sound like 12 human whispers speaking at once. Valfera screamed. Eric lunged to the red wheel and cranked it with both hands. It resisted, then moved with a shrieking grind. Deep in the tunnel systems around them, machinery awoke. Fans reversed. Pressure dampers slammed. Steam lines opened with concussive force. The mountain itself seemed to inhale. The creatures reacted instantly. Every slitted face turned toward the utility drift, sensing the incoming pulse. They began to retreat not in panic, but in coordinated withdrawal, making room for something else approaching from the pilot bore. Something larger. The air pressure dropped so fast, Eric's ears popped painfully. From the darkness beyond the broken barricade came a single massive knock that shook concrete dust from the ceiling. Then a shape filled the bore. It did not emerge all at once because it did not fit the geometry of movement the human eye expected. It folded, flattened, and rotated through spaces too narrow, assembling itself as it entered the junction. At its core was a thick, segmented body, broader than a man's chest, wrapped in layers of pale membrane. From it extended many limb branches, some finger-thin, some trunk-thick, all tipped with black hooks. Embedded beneath the translucent surface were human objects and remains fused into its internal scaffolding helmet shell fragments. Brass buttons, vertebrae, a wedding band, a child's shoe buckle, a row of teeth that were not arranged in any mouth. Its front surface rippled open into multiple vertical slits, and from every slit came voices, all of theirs, layered, whispered, calling each other by name. Farah turned the final switch. Down. The backdraft hit like a train. Superheated steam and pressure blasted through the old bore network, carrying dust-loose debris, and a roar so violent it erased thought. The large creature took the full force against its open front and slammed backward into the pilot bore, crushing smaller forms beneath it. Membranes burst. Black fluid atomized into the air. The hatch overhead belched steam downward as the shaft became a chimney. Concrete cracked. Light shattered. Jostein threw himself over Rune. Mikkel and Eric were hurled against the junction wall hard enough to see white. The pulse lasted only seconds. Then came the delayed consequence. The mountain started to fail. Not total collapse, but localized rockfall and lining breach, the dreadful rapid sequence every tunneler knows from training videos and every tunneler prays never to witness in person. Booms rolled through adjacent cavities. Concrete slabs sheared. Dust flooded the junction so thick the lamps became pale coins in brown fog. "Move," Eric shouted, though he could barely hear himself. The pilot bore was collapsing inward, sealing whatever lived deeper. The ceiling hatch above twisted as something large in the shaft thrashed once and fell away. Their only open route was the utility drift. They dragged Rune between them and ran. Behind them, the junction tore itself apart. Steam hissed. Metal screamed. Somewhere within the collapsing pilot bore, dozens of copied voices rose together into one long, impossible note that shook through Eric's bones more than his ears. The utility drift seemed shorter now, or perhaps terror had burned away the distortions. They reached the steel service door and spun the wheel. Jammed. Mikkel, half out of his mind with pain, rammed the locking arm with the scaling bar until it gave. The door burst open into the main tunnel. For one wild moment, Eric thought they had made it. Then his lamp swept the wall opposite and found fresh black writing 6 feet high across the shotcrete. "You opened us wider." The active tunnel beyond was no longer empty. Shapes moved inside the walls like embryos turning beneath translucent skin. Knocks came from every direction. The very rock had become porous to them. Farah stared at the message, then at the drifting black vapor in the air. "We didn't kill it," no, Eric said. At the far end of the tunnel, maybe 80 meters toward daylight, emergency lamps glowed faint amber. The portal, or something pretending to be. It was all they had. They ran toward it while the mountain knocked on both sides in perfect time with their hearts. The amber light ahead proved real. For the first time in what felt like an entire season underground, Eric saw the suggestion of open air, a faint gray wedge beyond the tunnel mouth, diluted dawn pressing through rain. The portal had never looked beautiful before. Now it looked holy. The last 100 meters were a blur of pain and instinct. Rune could barely keep his feet. Mikkel's left arm hung half useless where the hooked limb had punctured deep muscle. Farah's face and coveralls were black streaked with dust and whatever had burst from the creatures. Jostein limped one knee buckling every few steps. Eric himself felt flayed raw from adrenaline as if every nerve had been sanded down to metal. Yet the knocking behind them had changed. It no longer chased in obvious intervals. It had retreated into the walls again, traveling with them, pacing them. Sometimes they heard it on the right, then overhead, then ahead for a single tap that made all five stop dead. It wanted them to understand something. It was not being driven back. It was escorting them out. At 40 meters from the portal, they passed the dead bird line again. Only now, there were not 2 birds. There were 12 black feathered bodies arranged neatly across the floor in a curve like the beginning of a circle. Their necks had all been twisted the same direction. Eric stepped through without pausing, but he saw Farah notice the detail that mattered most. Each bird's beak had been stuffed with gravel from inside the tunnel, as if something had tried to silence them after death. Surface alarms were going off outside. Red beacons spun over the site yard. Men in reflective rain gear and hard hats clustered near vehicles staring toward the tunnel with the collective rigid posture of people who know a collapse or gas event has happened, but do not yet know whether survivors are coming out. Then they saw the 5 of them emerge. Everything exploded into motion. Voices, running boots, stretchers, questions, radios. The medic team took Rune first, then Mikkel. Someone wrapped Jostein in thermal foil. Someone else tried to steer Eric toward the medical unit, but he turned back toward the portal before they could force him away. Cold air still poured from the tunnel mouth. He stood in the rain and listened. Nothing. No knocks, no voices. Just the generator hum, the distant fjord wind men shouting measurements and shutdown commands. In the full morning light, the mountain looked ordinary again. Wet stone, moss, drill spoil, pine trees on the slope above. Whatever had lived in the dark did not belong out here. That thought should have comforted him. It didn't. Farah came to stand beside him, blanket around her shoulders, a shallow cut taped across one eyebrow. Rescue teams refusing re-entry until geotechnical assessment. Good. She watched the portal too. I checked my notes. Eric said nothing. The seepage line we found at 730 meters? It wasn't on the previous day's scan because it didn't exist then. She swallowed. Something had moved closer overnight. Not geologically. Spatially. He looked at her. You still think in science? I'm thinking pattern. Her voice was exhausted but precise. Cavity sound mapping mimicry, maybe some unknown cave-adapted colonial organism interacting with human neurology. None of that explains the writing, or the missing decades, or the way the tunnel distances changed. She pulled the old notebook from inside the blanket. Einar's notebook. She had kept it. But this does suggest one thing. She opened to the last damaged pages. Beneath the sentence they had read in the chamber, there was a line neither of them had noticed in the dark, half obscured by stain. It doesn't live in the mountain. It uses it like a throat. Eric felt something cold settle deeper inside him than fear. The site manager arrived then, pale and angry, and trying to hold his authority together in front of emergency services. He demanded a report. Eric gave him one stripped of impossibilities: unexplained cavity, severe disorientation, structural failure, biological hazard. Uncertain, immediate full closure recommended. He did not mention the voices. Did not mention the chamber of collected belongings. Did not mention the things with human parts beneath their skin. He didn't need anyone looking at him the way people look at men who have seen too much dark. But Jostein mentioned one thing before medics led him away. He looked at the mountain and said, "Count the people on site." The manager frowned. "What?" "Count them," Jostein repeated. Now, they did. Everyone was accounted for. Almost. One subcontractor from the morning prep crew, a young loader operator named Tobias, had been seen near the fuel shed at shift change and nowhere since. Radios lit up. Search teams spread through the camp. His locker was open. His coffee still warm. Tire tracks showed the loader had never moved. 10 minutes later, someone found his helmet resting upright on a stack of rock bolts facing the tunnel mouth. Inside the helmet, written in black fluid under the brim, were 5 short horizontal dashes crossed by a 6th. They shut the entire site down before noon. Police came. Then geological inspectors. Then ministry representatives. There would be paperwork, sealed reports, media management, accident language, all the machinery civilization uses when it needs to place an impossible event into bureaucratic containers. Eric sat through interviews, medical exams, and decontamination procedures that felt absurdly thin against what had actually happened. Blood was drawn. Pupils were checked. Exposure questions were asked. He answered what he could. By late afternoon, rain had become sleet. No one re-entered the tunnel. At dusk, as portable floodlights washed the portal in sterile white, a camera drone was finally sent in along the main bore. The feed transmitted to a monitor in the site office while a crowd of officials and workers watched in silence. For the first 300 meters, the tunnel showed routine damage. Fallen shotcrete, broken ducting, scattered tools. At 480 meters, the signal began to fuzz with static. At 620, the drone's audio picked up faint, intermittent tapping. At 711, the picture cut sideways for an instant, as if something had brushed the camera housing. At 800 meters, where the crew had first heard the knocking, the drone found only a wall of collapse. Fresh stone, complete blockage, no cavity, no borehole, no trace of black seepage. Just a smooth, tightly packed face of rock and broken debris, as if the mountain had healed over its own wound. The room exhaled. People looked at one another with relieved confusion, ready to let themselves believe in collapse, stress, panic, contamination, anything ordinary. Then the drone rotated slightly left on its damaged stabilizer. There, on the intact tunnel wall just before the collapse, something had been scratched into the rock from floor to ceiling in long, pale grooves. Not 6, 7. The feed died. Nobody in the office spoke for a very long time. The official story lasted 3 days. A localized failure event during exploratory tunneling. Possible gas exposure contributing to confusion. One missing worker presumed buried in unstable collapse beyond safe recovery range. Project suspended pending review. News outlets repeated the statement with the bland efficiency of distance. A few local papers mentioned old legends about Stilleberget, but only as color. Comment sections filled with armchair geology skepticism and dark humor. By the following week, the wider world had moved on. The people who had come out of the tunnel did not. Rune woke screaming in the hospital whenever machines clicked in even intervals. Mikkel underwent surgery for tissue damage around the punctures in his shoulder, but the surgeons could not explain the fine black filament residues embedded in the wound track. Farah stopped sleeping more than 90 minutes at a time and filled an entire notebook with diagrams trying to rationalize impossible geometry. Jostein went home to his village and boarded up every mirror in his house. Eric lasted 9 days before he returned to work, not at the tunnel which remained sealed and guarded, but at a logistics yard near Bergen. He told himself routine would help. Daylight would help. Open sky would help. But patterns had become dangerous things. He began noticing knocks everywhere. In the apartment wall at 2:14 a.m., in the hollow pillar of a parking garage, inside the dryer cycle at a laundromat. Always 3, then 2, then silence. His phone received voicemails containing only breathing. Once, while showering, he heard his own voice from the drain quietly asking, "Are you alone?" He changed apartments. The knocks changed with him. At first, he blamed trauma, sensory imprint, acute stress disorder, the mind reproducing terror because terror had carved a deep groove. Therapists used gentle language and offered techniques. He went through the motions. But then the physical details began returning in ways no panic response could account for. A black, damp line appeared beneath his bathroom mirror and dried before he could sample it. His hallway temperature dropped every night at exactly 3:07. 2 dead sparrows were found on his balcony next, twisted rightward. And one morning while shaving, he noticed 5 tiny crescent marks behind his left ear. Hooks, as if something very delicate had tested the skin there while he slept. He called Farah immediately. She came that evening with her notes, Einar's notebook, and the expression of someone who had run out of convenient lies. She looked exhausted, thinner than before, her hands cracked from washing them too often. "You too?" he asked. Instead of answering, she rolled up her sleeve. Along the inside of her forearm, under the skin, were faint, moving dark lines, no thicker than hairs, shifting slowly when she held still, and vanishing when she pressed them. Eric felt his stomach fold in on itself. "I had samples taken," she said. "Nothing conventional. They don't show under standard pathology, but I can feel them sometimes when it gets cold." "Inside you," she nodded once. He sat down heavily. Farah placed Einar's notebook on the table between them. I translated more. The damaged lines. He wrote that those who came out weren't always the ones that went in. Eric looked up slowly. Farah swallowed. He believed the mimicry wasn't for hunting. Not exactly. It was for transmission. Neither of them said the next thought aloud. The mountain had not merely called to them. It had learned them, copied them, opened through them. That was why the writing at the portal had mattered. Not 6, 7. 1 missing subcontractor. 5 survivors. That should have made 6 known living bodies touched by the event. But 7 meant 1 more had come out than had gone in. Eric tried to reconstruct the head count from that morning. Night crew, day prep crew, emergency responders, chaos at the portal, blankets, stretchers, alarms. He realized with growing horror that he could not remember seeing Tobias's face clearly at all. Only his name, shouted over radios after the count failed. "What are you saying?" he asked. Farah's eyes were wet now. "I'm saying we don't know which absence mattered." He thought of Rune turning with that copied smile, of the creatures carrying human structures under their skin, of the voices that had reached not only memory, but grief. "You think one of us?" "I think something passed the threshold," she said. "Maybe inside us, maybe as us." The apartment went silent. Then, from Eric's bedroom came 3 soft knocks inside the wall. "Talk! Talk! Talk!" Neither moved. A child's voice followed, muffled by plaster. "Can I come nearer now?" Farah stood so abruptly her chair tipped over. Eric grabbed the flashlight from the counter and crossed the hall with steps that did not feel attached to him. He opened the bedroom door. The room was empty, window locked, closet closed, bed undisturbed. But the far wall above the baseboard bulged inward and relaxed, as if something large had shifted behind it in a space too narrow to contain it. Farah was breathing fast behind him. "Eric." He aimed the flashlight beam at the mirror over the dresser. Written across the glass from the inside beneath the silver backing, where no hand could have reached, were 2 words in black branching lines. "We listen." The light in the bedroom flickered once, then his phone rang in his pocket. He knew before looking who it would say. Tobias. His thumb hovered over accept. The knocking started again, not just in the bedroom wall now, but everywhere in the apartment at once. Kitchen pipes, window frame floorboards, inside the radiator, inside the glass of the mirror. An entire architecture answering itself in measured rhythm. The pattern was no longer random. It matched his heartbeat exactly. Farah whispered, "Don't." But Eric had already understood the most terrible part. The sound inside the mountain had not become stronger after they broke through at 800 meters. It had become clearer, because the barrier it needed was never stone. It was people. He declined the call. The ringing stopped. For 1 second, every knock in the apartment stopped with it. Then his own throat clicked once from deep inside, small and hard, like something on the other side had tapped back. He looked at Farah. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke. Because in the silence between heartbeats from somewhere behind Eric's teeth, a voice waited to use his mouth.